Mark and Dave, KEX.
Congressman Peter Defazio joins the Mark and Dave show at 1190 KEX. Talk about what happened in chambers here. Your colleague, Congressman Jamie Herrera Butler, the Congresswoman of Southwest Washington, wanted to put up the CCR funding to a vote to Vancouver taxpayers, which you said was a bad idea.
No, I believe that the local government or the local transit district, I understand, has to hold a vote if they intend to tax local residents. And generally in Washington State, that's done by a transit district, and the transit district would determine the time and place of the election. They would also determine the scope of the election, i.e., how many people within their transit district would be served by this, and therefore who would be subject to the tax or the costs of this. That's a local government function. Ms. Butler tried to sneak this into the bill in a manager's amendment, which no one had seen before 10:30 in the morning during an 18-hour markup. It wasn't even in the 850-page bill, which every Republican admitted they hadn't read. There were many other crazy things in the bill, but that wasn't in there. It was in this manager's amendment, which popped up and was almost immediately voted on until we noted this and a couple other problems and raised them. Secondly, they didn't want to name Vancouver because that would be an earmark violating the Republicans' earmark pledge. So they drew it up as any project connecting two states that costs more than $1 billion, which involves an entity who does not have a fixed route transit system. And it was so poorly drafted, it's not clear whether she would force a vote by the city of Vancouver, the transit district, the entire transit district, those affected by any potential tax, which is already required by Washington law, or the whole county, or maybe the whole state, depending upon the poor drafting. Anyway, the committee considered it to be somewhat controversial. We had a vote, and it was stricken from the bill.
She was on our show prior to this and said that she thought that residents of Vancouver should have a voice in it. She wanted to hear what they had to say. That was her requirement, that there be a vote, a referendum.
In Oregon, that would be possible. I don't know all the laws of Washington State, but I was told by one of the Washington representatives that Washington law would require the transit district to hold a vote if there was going to be any tax raised to support the light rail project. But what it would have done is created bad national policy, which could have affected New York or any other two cities joined across a state line. And it would have, brought controversy and uncertainty to this. Vancouver has a mayor. He can hold a referendum if he wants on potential tolling for the bridge. He and the city council and the transit district would be required to hold a vote on the other issue, which would be any taxes related to light rail.
This has dragged on longer than my kitchen remodel.
Well, we've all had that kitchen remodel. I think we kind of got off track somewhere back there in the weeds. The project as first presented was, the engineers from Washington and Oregon and the Departments of Transportation getting together and saying, let's solve every present and future potential transportation issue in a corridor about 20 miles long. It just was like an engineer's dream of a giant project. That wasn't an appropriate solution. I think Governor Kitzhaber has done a great job reining them in. All the way along, I kept saying, I know we need to replace the bridge, but there is a limit to what we can pay for these things. Keep that in mind. And they'd say yes, and then they came in with the gold-plated project. We're back now. It still needs some work locally. The two states need to still figure out viable financing.
A lot of people are frustrated with government spending. Here was an opportunity to do something, and it didn't happen.
They didn't have a plan. I mean, this is going to be principally paid for in the region. In Oregon, we get over $400 million a year from the federal government for transportation projects. Some portion of that would go to this, plus some other special potential apportionment. Washington State, similarly. They didn't have a viable plan or a particular project. I mean, they've just gotten back on track this year where, Governor Kitzhaber and Governor Gregoire's finally said, plain vanilla option, we're not going to build an iconic bridge, and you're not going to solve every transportation problem. And they're still, they've just recently come out with a more focused, phased approach, and they still don't have a financing plan. And you got to have a financing plan before you come to the federal government and ask for money.
All right, stop right there. This thing will never get built. Representative Peter Defazio with Mark and Dave. Thanks for being on with Mark and Dave. Do you think you'll ever drive across that new bridge in your lifetime?
Not if there's a toll, but I appreciate the congressman joining us. I appreciate his candor. But
I'm not sure Jamie Lynn Herrera Butler does.
No.
So